What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Luke DeWolf is a cybersecurity professional, podcaster, amateur musician, author, and Bitcoin advocate, and community organizer. Defending Bitcoin is his first solo book, merging the Bitcoin and cybersecurity worlds as a culmination of years of experience in each space. Bitcoin secures over $1 trillion in value. It has no security team. Defending Bitcoin applies the same frameworks that protect power grids and pipelines to Bitcoin, the world's first decentralized critical infrastructure. The full threat landscape is here. Exchange failures, lost keys, 51% attacks, insider threats, government bans, quantum computing. The book pairs each threat with layered defenses, drawn from industrial standards with practical steps you can take today. If you're a Bitcoiner who wants to think like a defender or a security-minded reader new to Bitcoin, this book is the bridge. As Jeff Booth says, the cybersecurity book Bitcoin has been waiting for. Lawrence Lepard says, read it before you need it. Luke, welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
Said, I'm great, and thank you so much for that intro. I really appreciate it. And everything you said. I remember putting together that back cover, and I mean, I'm flattered by all the endorsements I was able to get passing the book around before it launched. I mean, Jeff, Larry, Lynn, really proud of that. So thanks for highlighting that to start us off, and really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on the show. I'm excited to get into this. This book looks like a tour de force. I'll be up front. I've only gotten to skim through it a bit. We put this together in a way that I haven't been able to get through the whole book yet. But we wanted to kind of have a conversation about Bitcoin security and defending Bitcoin. I think it's very apropos. I'd like to talk about or hear about your background a bit more about industrial grade security.
Sure. Well, great. So to give you the rundown, I started my career in Calgary, Alberta. That's my hometown. I wasn't born there, but I lived there since I was 4 or 5 or something. And the whole thing was the oil and gas industry is the main industry in Calgary, in Alberta, and really it's one of the economic engines of Canada, and that has something to do with I would say my career shifts and finding Bitcoin and all this. So industrial control systems is everything that controls something in the physical world. That's the things that make a valve open in a water pipeline, gas pipeline. That's the things that control electrical grids. That's the stuff that's putting things together in factories, right? So the IT world you might be familiar with. This is everything that's purely digital realm. That's your computers, that's your email, your Microsoft software, things like this. But OT is the flip side to that, and that's touching the physical world. And when you touch the physical world, there can be dire consequences. Things can get explodey, to be a little glib about it, and people can lose their lives, honestly. So that's really why the ethos of critical infrastructure security is keep everything as safe as possible, and that's a bit of a shift and a difference between how things are taken care of in the kind of the IT space. It's you're protecting different things, and so the mindset is a little bit different. So I started my career in Calgary in the oil and gas sector, and I spent a good few years administering the control systems that powered some gas pipelines and monitored gas wells out in the oil and gas fields. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the low level of how things work. This is down to the level of matching up the bytes on that are flowing through a communication stream. Things like this, really low level stuff, all the way up to what happens if you lose communication with your oil pipeline, and do you need to shut that down and cost the company $1 million an hour, something like that. So big decisions that have real impact, right? And then I switched to the security side of things after a few years, got involved in security consulting, and that's where I built my understanding of risk. Cybersecurity is the management of digital risk. That's at least my semi definitive definition. So that's where I learned about risk, what is risk, and how we defend all sorts of things in cyberspace, including critical infrastructure. And then fast forward a few years, and I'm in the Bitcoin space, and economic upheaval that was happening in Canada left me searching for, say, some ways out of the current system. I found Bitcoin at around the same time I decided to move halfway across the world. I'm now based in Finland, and I intend to stay 100%. But found Bitcoin, and the last few years I've been all in on Bitcoin when I'm not spending time with my family or my day job, which I still have in the critical infrastructure security space. But focused on Bitcoin, and then I realized that I had a book in me, and that turned into the one you're holding in your hand. So that was a fair bit. I think I answered your question and more. Back to you. Said.
No, that was great. I want to hear so much more. I want to go back to your background a bit before we get into the book. And I do want to hear about what inspired you to write this book. So maybe we could table that for a second, or just keep that in mind. So it sounds like the first part of your career, you got to ensure systems run correctly, that when a knob needs to turn or a valve needs to work or open, that it's going to do what it needs to do at the appropriate, whatever vector you're looking at. And in that sense, you're probably lining things up, very simple things like making sure, people are measuring things in the same denominator, but also things are working the way they're supposed to, so things aren't failing. And then you moved into more like security, like, is someone attacking the system and defending the system? And both seem critical, and they probably have to work hand in hand. And I wonder how much trust, needs to be there when discussing these issues, or how, what are the second and third order effects of actions we might take or not take? Who's a good actor or a bad actor? Is this idea that sounds good, someone on the inside maybe acting in bad faith because they have an external incentive we don't know about? And what do we not know? So maybe what kind of things did you learn from your career before Bitcoin that you sort of apply to Bitcoin?
Sure. Well, hey, so the first thing that I'll latch on to a little bit is the different denominations. The funniest thing is that when we're dealing with systems that have to have both imperial, like American measurements, and metric, right? You can just 100% get that one side configures the wrong measurement, and those can be off drastically. There's a story in kind of the safety space. It's in the aerospace industry, and something like the fuel was measured wrong for a flight, right? And it was just entirely that the person had flipped the metric and the imperial, and that left a big flight completely running out of fuel midair. And so this is the sort of thing that just gets drilled into you really early. And it was something constantly over and over. You had to check and double check everything. That was the whole bit. And so thoroughness and this engineering mindset and really being paying attention to detail. That's a lot of these things that I built over the course of that time. The security side of it is different in one sense, but it isn't in another. We have a bit of a saying in the so just some more terminology. Industrial control systems is the more generic way to describe these systems we're talking about. Operational technology is that OT, the other side of it. So those are interchangeable. But in the ICS security space, the idea is that there's no such thing as a junior person in this field. You either come in having some cybersecurity experience already, and then you eventually move into the ICS OT space, or you come in, like in my case, with experience working with these systems, and then start to learn about and apply the cybersecurity side of it. And so from my side, the security was also a part of my job. It just wasn't the thing I was focusing on. But what I brought was the understanding and the mindset of these systems and knowing how they worked, how they operate, and then being able to look a little bit better at how to apply security. And a lot of this stuff is actually more about policy, like how you do things. The biggest factor in all of cybersecurity really is people. And this is probably a little bit closer to answering your actual question. How do I apply this to Bitcoin? People are always the weakest link, right? It's always someone who makes a mistake, clicks the bad link that lets in the malware, the ransomware, something like this. You might have heard there's a famous call it case study, but actually really big news item where back in about 2007 time, Iran's nuclear program was seriously degraded by a worm that targeted their industrial centrifuges. And we still to this day do not know how this happened or who's behind it. We have some pretty good ideas, but the idea was it's very likely that a USB stick was planted at some Iranian facility, and then someone goes and plugs the USB stick in their laptop, and that lets the worm in, and then millions, if not billions, of dollars of damage was done to Iran's nuclear program. And setting aside the politics, that was real consequences to something as simple as someone plugging in a USB stick, right? So people and education and policies and processes and how people do things is a real big part of cybersecurity. It's not just these technical things like anti-malware or other things like that. And applying that to Bitcoin, the whole central theme of the book Defending Bitcoin is that there's always something you can do, right? Every single piece of security is depending on the actions of individuals on the network, whether that's running a node and making sure that it's got the settings correct so that it's got the right security posture, that's taking custody of your own keys, that's making sure your, say, inheritance process is settled. These are all security elements, down to other things like decentralizing mining or resisting political regulatory pressure, quantum computing. All of this stuff has ways that you, the individual, can take action and do your part to help secure the network. And so that's the common thread, and really I think that's the biggest thing that kind of the earlier part of my career taught me, was that there's always something that involves the individual. We can't just rely on the technology to do the job for us, basically.
It's very interesting you bring up the individual and hierarchies and sort of how no one is junior, especially in the security field. I think, as sort of corporate accounting consulting, I've witnessed people be junior in situations a lot of times, whether myself or someone else, and maybe they had the best ideas, but their ideas were sometimes shot down, not because of, but more out of hierarchical decisions.
Mm.
And I would think, though, in the cybersecurity industry, because also I think there's a low time preference in more sort of corporate mid-level management. So in my experience, most higher managers, maybe whether they knew or didn't know what was best, were acting in very low time preference sort of environments where wait and see. And they might not even be around when the results come in, good or bad. And you were mentioning how in cybersecurity it comes down, the people. How do you make sure the people aren't the weakest link? Well, if they are the weakest link, how do you secure the weakest link enough that it's not a dire threat?
Sure. A few threads here, just even to address the corporate hierarchy side of things. The whole idea of there's no such thing as a junior, that's a little bit to say that everyone comes in with their own experience and background, right? And unifying those experiences so that we can all be talking the same language is actually what I was getting at there. And I reference it in the beginning of Defending Bitcoin, as far as that I'm talking to both Bitcoiners who I know want to secure their Bitcoin and help secure the network. But I also wrote it as something that, say, cybersecurity or IT professionals who I work with in, on the LinkedIn side of things, for them to be able to understand Bitcoin a little bit better. So I wrote it from kind of those two perspectives. And it's the same thing with kind of this ICS cybersecurity, right? We've got people who come in from both backgrounds, and there's definitely a lot of understanding that people have different strengths. I've countless times in my career had to go to someone who knew some avenue of the space a little bit better than I did, and knowing when to do that is a huge part of everything, I think. So and it was also interesting about kind of the low time preference mindset in organizations. The funny thing is I spent most of my cybersecurity time in consulting, and that's a super high time preference space, right? It's always about can you sell the next piece of work, and you got to do the job well, but you also got to do it quickly. And I mean, I learned how to be efficient with both my time and my effort, but yeah, that kind of environment, I burned out after a few years, like most people do. The career path in some of these for people who stay in consulting a long time, often you had to take a break for a few years before coming back as a hire manager or something like that, and then maybe you can have that lower time preference mindset. But anyway, so the whole thing with people being the weakest link, first of all, it's education, right? Education, knowing about the cybersecurity issues that affect you. And so in the critical infrastructure space, that's all about making sure that the folks on the front line know what the issues are, know what the risks are, and tailoring it to them, right? It doesn't make a whole ton of sense to be bombarding them with say trainings about how to make sure your email is safe, when it's something more like, hey, don't write your password down on a sticky note and put it on the monitor. Don't plug a USB stick into the thing that is controlling the compressor station, something like this. So it's just tailoring it for different people. And this is the same thing with having a security book for Bitcoiners, right? You got to talk the same language, and for me, what I tried to do is make it accessible for Bitcoiners who might not have a technical background. I tried to cover these technical concepts without assuming the technical knowledge, right? And I've had pretty good feedback. You'll have to tell me what you think, but yeah, I think I hit the goal pretty well in terms of at least covering some of these deeper topics in a way that's accessible, right? Accessibility would be the overarching theme there: education and accessibility. Then
sorry, I didn't
go
mean to
ahead.
cut you off. No,
No,
please. No,
well,
please.
just the last point from your question, as far as what happens when people fail, right? Well, the key there is defense in depth. Have more than one layer of control. Make it so that there isn't ever one single point of failure, one weakest link, right? And that could be a person, that could be some piece of technology, whatever it is. You just always want to have more layers, right? And with Bitcoin, it's the same thing. You want to make sure that there are multiple things in the way of someone getting to your private key, for example, and you want to make sure that the network has multiple ways of being decentralized, so that there's no one party that can attack it and take it down, right? So that's the whole idea.
Right. So no single point of failure. So layered defense, multiple layers of defense, and then it sounds like words matter, and language is really, a shared language is really important.
I totally agree with you there. Yeah, if you don't know how to talk to each other, communicate, you're not going to get anywhere.
So let's maybe talk about, well, how is Bitcoin critical infrastructure? What makes it critical infrastructure, and then how is the defense different?
Yeah, great. So the whole thing with critical infrastructure is this is the stuff that is needed to keep the world running, right? And I mean, this is things like the water system, electrical system, heating, right? It's the stuff that gets into the grocery stores, the whole supply chains, the factories that make that stuff happen. There are so many things that go into keeping our lives as comfortable as we have them, right? Especially in the Western world. And the way Bitcoin fits in, there are tons of definitions of critical infrastructure. Virtually every country has their own, but payment systems are always up there, right? If your payment system goes down, your Visa, your MasterCard, there are outages all the time. Banks go down, right? This is a big deal. If they don't come back within a few hours, people can really start to have problems with either say buying things or invoices being settled or what have you, right? And so just first of all, on that first notion, Bitcoin is clearly a payment system, and it's also global. It's effectively there are, again, with the Visas and MasterCards and everything, they might be global, but they're not global in the same way that Bitcoin is global in terms of being able to transact across borders. It's a unifying currency, right? And so Bitcoin is this global decentralized payment system, and it's being adopted by an increasing number of people who absolutely would consider it critical, right, to their livelihoods. Once you get it kind of thing. But then another side to it, another angle, is that Bitcoin is increasingly being tied to the energy system through mining. And the ways that Bitcoin is sort of symbioting with mining are actually pretty huge at the moment. Like there are all these ways for Bitcoin to affect the electrical grids. Demand response is one way to do it. For example, in Texas, ERCOT, their grid has a whole lot of Bitcoin mining on it that is able to ramp down if the grid needs it. And the winter storms that have happened over the last few years showed that Bitcoin mining was able to ramp down, right? So the connection to electricity and the electrical grid is first of all just simply by the fact that there are all these ASICs that need electricity that are connected to grids everywhere. And then there's just the ways that, for example, Bitcoin mining is connecting people to electricity. For example, Gridless out of Africa is connecting Bitcoin mines to remote villages to give them electricity for the first time, which is huge. Here in Finland, one of the biggest ways that Bitcoin is being used is Bitcoin mining is being used as heating. So there's actually a whole city that is currently, and they don't know it, that's being heated by Bitcoin mining primarily through the district heating system. The waste heat from Bitcoin mining is going into these district heating systems and offsetting the cost of heat, and that's lowering the cost of the Bitcoin mining. So it's just getting connected into all of these different areas and becoming essential in ways that people don't know and don't understand. And so this is just to say that from multiple angles, Bitcoin hits this critical infrastructure brief. Now, the way that we defend these things differently, though, is that, so I'm going to give a concept called the CIA triad, nothing to do with the US three-letter agency, but CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, availability. And this is basically the three pillars of cybersecurity, that virtually everything in cybersecurity is defending against one of these pillars. Defending one of these pillars. So confidentiality is keeping secrets safe, keeping things like your password or your private key safe. Integrity is making sure that no one tampers with your information. So that could be if they hack into your account and they change things, such as make your big X account start promoting meme coins or something like this, or DMing your contacts so that they can get a hold of their accounts, that sort of thing. That's a violation of integrity. But availability is the big one, and this is what differentiates critical infrastructure systems from others in kind of the IT world, is that keeping the system running is the absolute key here. If these systems are down, there are real effects in the real world, and either the essential service isn't working right, or there's going to be delays in the supply chain, or the lights are out, there's no electricity, something like this. So availability is the key here. And if Bitcoin stops being able to produce a block every 10 minutes, right, that's game over. The system is all about availability and keeping availability going at the highest level here. So we would look at security of these types of systems from the lens of how do we keep it running, right? And the trade-offs definitely involve a few things here, such as you can't interfere with the system itself actually running. Like, you can't put so much security on a Bitcoin node that it can't actually connect properly. You can't put so much security on, say, like a mining system that they can't connect back to the network. So it's just learning to work within constraints and really just making sure that this system that people rely on stays running. That's the difference.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I want to talk about sort of more about this Bitcoin as critical infrastructure, though. I think you laid that out really well. I around miners and how we need security. We can get into the difficulty adjustment, but then we wouldn't have 10-minute blocks in different situations, or they would be too fast or too slow. What about, but there's the individual side of it, sort of where you talked a lot about maybe with confidentiality and sort of maintaining passwords and integrity and how you access Bitcoin. But when I think about Bitcoin as critical infrastructure, I think about the ledger. And how we all interact with the ledger. How does that ring with you? I think about sort of the shared ledger and how would the ledger sort of be defended or defend itself? Or what would that mean? What would be the threats to the ledger? Because I could see, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. Well, hey, so the difference in the two approaches, that's something real here. The individual side of Bitcoin, to the individual, keeping your private key safe and making sure someone doesn't steal your individual Bitcoin is sometimes the number one priority, right?
Sure.
But the thing is, there, when you go the level deeper, you really do have to have, as you say, the shared ledger also working. And there are a number of attack vectors that are really targeting that side of things. So I divide defending Bitcoin into 10 threat chapters, and I don't want to imply that that's a categorization that's comprehensive, right? It's not like there's only 10 categories of things that can go wrong, but there's only so many things you can say in 450 pages, right? But so there's 10 chapters, and it's divided into 3 sections. It's threats to the individual, threats to the network, and then I'm calling them kind of external threats. So in other words, there's sort of 2 sides of threats to the network: the stuff that's sort of internal to the system and its operation, and then stuff from outside, like political stuff or quantum computing, things like this. So the thing is that the threat to the ledger and the threat to the way the ledger works, right? There's a few categories here. One is making sure that the nodes are working, right? If there was a major bug in a widespread node software that allowed for major changes to how the network works, the availability of the network, maybe it even puts funds at risk, something like this. I mean, it's a decentralized system, but we're all running node software if we're running nodes, right? And this is ultimately something that can have bugs, right? So the nodes enforce the rules of the ledger, and so that's one attack vector, right? And I do want to say that there are developers doing fantastic work. Most of them are working on Bitcoin Core on the security side, and that's fantastic work. Like, the security updates to your node are important, and you shouldn't ignore them. They might not affect you immediately, or you might not think they would affect you, but over time, if you're out of date, this stuff can add up. You can be more vulnerable to different types of attacks. Then mining is, I think, the big one here, right? That making sure mining stays as decentralized as possible, not controlled by any one entity. That's huge. If a miner has 51% or even 45% plus of the hash rate, they can start to do funny things that would definitely put the integrity of the ledger at risk, right? And the whole thing here is that a 51% attack, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone is going to, well, it can mean that a miner is able to do a double spend effectively. Like a transaction comes through on the network to one individual, but then they invalidate that and put it to another individual, something like this. Or they can reorganize the chain so that they're the only ones that get block rewards, things like this. But they can also just censor. They can also choose not to include certain transactions on the blockchain, which would affect the permissionlessness of the network and affect the censorship resistant properties of the network. This is all stuff that maybe isn't taking down the system, right? But it is the sort of thing that would massively affect the confidence of people to be able to use the system, right? Bitcoin is a shared set of rules, and if we no longer agree on what those rules are, the consequences can be catastrophic. So there's a lot going on there, and that's not even to get into kind of the governance of the software and things like this, or stuff coming from outside the political regulatory environment. There's all sorts of things that would affect the shared ledger, as you put it.
Sure. I mean, at what point is confidence, or could, this is all hypothetical, confidence be degraded enough that it's a threat because people can't access or run or access the ledger through running a node or the things you're describing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think if a one mining entity, or say two mining entities colluding together, clearly, measurably. For example, there are a whole bunch of pools. You probably know mempool.space, but mempool.guide is a fantastic fork of mempool.space, and it shows a whole bunch of mining pools that basically get the same templates and use the same templates from AntPool. And AntPool alone only has something like 10 or 15% of the hash rate, but the mining pools that use its template are something like 30% of the hash rate, right? Foundry has over 30%. So these entities alone control a lot and find a lot of the Bitcoin blocks, right? So the thing there is, if a 51% attack were to happen, I mean, yeah, I don't know exactly how we would manage that. Shout to the miners, like the individual miners who are providing the hash rate to these pools, to jump ship immediately. Like that would be, I think, the only thing that would work. There was there was a 51% issue back in 2014, I believe, ghash.io. And this was an instance where effectively the first cloud mining instance properly happened, where you were able to effectively rent hash rate through one of these pools, right? And they got over 50% of the network, but the community was able to rally together and say, hey, this doesn't work, we can't allow this to happen. And ghash wasn't being malicious or anything, but people left them in droves and decentralized the network quickly, right? And I mean, these days, with mining being such a industrial process, and I don't know how plugged in the average miner actually is to the things that are going on. It's like the larger the ship is, the more slow moving it is, right? So I would be worried that miners would react quickly enough to counter a potential 51% issue, right? I mean, back to your original question, it's kind of hard to see. It's a little nebulous to see the things that would actually cause Bitcoin to be entirely unusable, right? But one of the things with say something like critical infrastructure generally, or applied to Bitcoin directly, is that you don't want 1,000 cuts, right? You don't want degrading over time. The term for that in the industry and industrial systems is normalization of deviance. If you normalize something being a little bit wrong, right? Like say someone isn't walking down, isn't following the designated walking path all the time. They take a little shortcut through the factory, something like this. Well, one day they're gonna get sideswiped by a forklift. You know what I mean? If it just keeps happening and happening all the time, and nobody is enforcing these strict standards, right? And this is the same thing with Bitcoin. Mining has been trending in a centralizing direction. Foundry has a ton of the hash rate, right? But there are tools to decentralize mining and put mining back in the hands of the individual hashers, to kind of differentiate the term, right? And so the thing is, we don't want the security situation to just keep getting progressively worse. And security, in a lot of senses, is decentralization in Bitcoin terms.
Sure. Well, you would think with Foundry, I mean, or any pool, they're made up of individual miners or constituents of some sort who can change their opinion at any time. So the pool sort of has to satisfy the customer. It's sort of like people who might hate Amazon but still use it for the convenience, or hate that, you know, they're worth so much, or Jeff Bezos, but still use it. And it's like, well, he's providing you a benefit, and and if enough people didn't like the benefit, he would be worth probably less. And so Foundry faces the same sort of market pressures. I think nodes are in a different place because they're not receiving a fee to run the node in the short term or long term. And you would think people who are running a node are either interested because they're holding or hodling Bitcoin, or interested in the rules for some reason and verifying them. But I think in terms of if the nodes are disincentivized, that would be sort of a centralizing force in some way that would, I would think, be a threat to sort of our shared ledger.
Absolutely.
More so maybe some of the other categories.
Yeah. I mean, the keeping nodes decentralized is massive, right? And the cost of running a node has been a major issue over these last few years. Has the cost of running a node been going up? And in real terms, it has been. If we're talking about the cost to run a full validating node, the amount of storage required has been going up. The amount of memory required to sync the blockchain has been going up. And now you can entirely flip side that with, has the cost of hardware been going down? Yes, to an extent, but the AI boom has made things like RAM and storage more expensive. But also there have been technical changes done to make, for example, it easier to run a node with less storage space, or run a node that is able to handle a growing UTXO set more easily when downloading the chain, right? So there are technical fixes being put in to address these hardware cost issues, but the whole thing with it is that if you're not running a node and validating your Bitcoin transactions through your node, you're trusting someone else. And if you are making the choice to trust someone else, well, what's stopping everyone in Bitcoin from just handing off their trust to someone else? So I think the cultural side of it is actually more of an issue. Keeping node running accessible and part of being a thing you do as a Bitcoiner that gets to a certain level. I mean, running a node is absolutely a security and privacy control. In my view, it's the only way that you can actually protect your privacy properly, is to run your own node and run your own transactions through your node, validate your transactions. No one else gets to see it. The Bitcoin network is just seeing yet another node in the system, right? And that protects your privacy, your self-sovereignty. You don't have to trust anyone. But there is a lot to running a node. And actually, it's funny you said convenience, right? So the trade-off to security is convenience itself, right? Every bit of security you put into your setup is one little layer, extra layer of inconvenience, right? Just having a password itself, having to remember a password, whether you have it in a password manager, which I recommend, or you literally remember all your passwords, that's hard to do. But that's a little bit of extra friction, but it adds a lot of security, right? Same thing with having to do some kind of multi-factor authentication, getting a code to your app or your email or something. Avoid SMS, by the way. Like I really advise people to avoid getting these codes through SMS where possible. It's really easy. I mean, not easy, but it's really possible to get your phone number stolen and by hackers who can then get the codes and stuff like this. So yeah, the whole thing with it is that you're giving up convenience in order to get security. That's the trade-off, right? And so if you're using the convenient thing, such as using Foundry because they have great service, and I think a big factor is that they really satisfy the needs of U.S. miners who have certain regulatory requirements. Right, Foundry appears to be very good at solving that particular problem. Well, including KYC and all this. Then you are saying, hey, Foundry, I'm okay with you building my block template. I'm okay with you deciding what goes in the Bitcoin blocks that my ASICs are trying to find. And I'm just giving up that layer of security, right? Or I'm giving up that layer of control to you, to Foundry, right? Same thing as you give that up to Amazon instead of going to your mom and pop shop and supporting local industry, things like this. It's kind of philosophical stuff, right? And then when you take it to the level of what does it really mean to be kind of a secure Bitcoin miner and decentralizing the network? Well, building your own blocks is a huge part of that, right? Because it means that there aren't 5 or 6 entities only that are deciding what goes in to the Bitcoin blocks, right? And a huge part of keeping the Bitcoin network accessible to everyone is that there are people, different individuals who are mining, who are trying to find blocks, who have different philosophies about what kind of content is okay on Bitcoin, what types of content are okay on Bitcoin, but also people who are just going to say screw you to any kind of censorship demands by governments, right? If you're worried that, say, a regulated entity from China or the US is going to censor addresses that have been banned because they're allegedly connected to terrorism or whatever, enemies of the state, as long as you have these pleb miners who are willing to say, no, screw that, I'm going to mine these transactions anyway, the network does remain censorship resistant and accessible to everyone, right? But yeah, the more we go to big entities, whether it's on mining or on nodes, giving up that responsibility and putting trust in third parties, that's the thing that can slowly lead towards Bitcoin not being what we hoped it would be. So that's the less exciting and slower, but probably more accurate threat.
Yeah. I just keep thinking about sort of the desire to run the node in the future. What would you sort of maybe pin the price of running a node, getting set up to start running the node? Maybe from sort of the lower DIY end to sort of mid to higher market. And do you have sort of numbers around that, or?
Yeah, I'm not up on the exact numbers these days, but I do know that there were a lot of issues with, say, different models of Raspberry Pi. This is from talking to people who set up and sync tons of nodes. People on kind of the customer service side, like, do they have issues with cheaper hardware, things like this? It's a few $100s at this point. It's not crazy, but to many people, a few $100s is all their wealth, right? Or more wealth than they've ever had in their whole lives, right? So there is definitely an issue with Bitcoin node running being accessible to people in the global south, for sure. I would say that it's only accessible to the higher middle class, upper class in huge parts of the world, and that's not ideal. But then if you want to have machines that, say, have the power to run a full validating node and sync the blockchain in a reasonable amount of time, something like this, I mean, it's getting into the high hundreds, even thousands, right? I was seeing that the base model Start9 server that they sell on their website, their server one, that's $899. I did know that offhand, and you can get a higher model for $1099, right? $1,100, right? And I mean, that's a proper piece of equipment, supposed to last years, right? Like I've got a Start9 running behind me, right, from a few years ago, which I love. I've been a fan of Start9 for a long time. I love their OS, and what's great about them is that you can run it on any piece of hardware you want. If you buy the hardware from them, they kind of make a few things easier for you and make it easier to kind of set up, right? But at the end of the day, that's sort of just supporting their business. You know, they make everything available for free, and so I mean, you can do it DIY, sure, but you either pay money or you pay time, right? So it's not just about the money; it's about the know-how. It's about how easy it is to do in one click, right? There's whole lot of user experience issues, right? Like what would be great is if you could order a Bitcoin node that basically has everything 100% done for you. You just have to plug it in and off you go. It syncs the last few blocks and you're off and running, right? I don't think we're really there yet. I think there are services that do sync the blockchain, but it costs more money, and I don't think it's like that out of the box, you know. So hundreds of dollars, getting into thousands, it's real money, and I think you do have to have a certain amount of stack, right, before that expenditure becomes worth it to people.
Yeah, bit of a chicken and egg problem there. It sounds like, you know, maybe for $100 to $200, you can scrape together a node and just throw a lot of time at it. And time's an honest exchange of, you know, for value. And then, you know, maybe $300 to $500 to kind of have something decent, somewhat out of the box, easy to use. And then $500 to $1,000 for something robust, simple to use. But it maybe has the features of a Ferrari, and you could kind of like do complicated things, but do it all. And for me, that just seems like, you know, in 5 or 10 years, you're looking at 5,000 to 10,000 to do this. And you start looking at, is that in 20 to 30 years, $100,000, and a stake still costs $800 in that world, not $100,000. It's not a stake. And, you know, is it $1 million a node? You know, and that's not, I don't know. I don't know how many kids and grandchildren are going to be running a $50,000 node. That's a really interesting vector to me. And maybe that's, you know, let's talk about spam. And do you see this as a cybersecurity issue for Bitcoin as critical infrastructure?
I do see it as an issue, but I see it as an issue from maybe a different angle than I think you're getting at here, and I'll explain why. So, first of all, just a little bit.
I hope I wasn't getting at anything too much. I guess I am getting at something, but yeah, I wasn't.
No. Well, at least based on kind of the line of the conversation here. So just to put a couple of things here. So node cost, right? I mean, I'm a big fan of Jeff Booth's deflationary work, right? Price of tomorrow, and well, I think the whole thing there is that even if nominal costs go up, right? At least the real value, what you get back, should be getting better also. And I mean, we do see with monetary inflation all the things. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here that the Cantillon effect, when you get inflation, it doesn't trickle back to the average person so quickly, right? But it's not like when a node costs $50,000, salaries will have gone up a fair bit. Other cost of living things will have gone up proportionally, and I'm also not entirely sure when running a Bitcoin node is going to become inaccessible in terms of the actual hardware, right? Moore's law, the law that the cost of a transistor or other parts of technology, because it's applied to more than just transistors, it halves every 2 years, something like this. I do think it's been broken, but it's still trending down. Like hardware keeps getting improved. There is some speculation that we're getting to physical limits, though. Like physically, we can't fit more. we can't fit more. What is it? Something on a silicon wafer, right? We can't fit more circuits or what it is, right? And so that maybe that's a concern. I believe the estimated date when a Bitcoin node is going to require 4 terabytes to be a full validating node, that's about 2037 when that's likely coming, right? And we are hitting the point where a full validating node is going to need more than 1 terabyte. The blockchain itself is something like 700 to 800 gigabytes at the moment. I don't have the exact number. I don't think it's 800 yet. It's close. But then you have everything else that you need to have running on a Bitcoin node, and that needs some storage. And so folks are getting capped out on a 1 terabyte hard drive, right? If you want to be a full validating node. Now, again, like I've had conversations with people who don't think spam is a problem, and who don't think spam is a problem, especially for node runners, right? Developers, many of them. I went to the Bitcoin Plus Plus conference in Vienna, really appreciated the invitation to go to that one. This was just after I announced defending Bitcoin. And I got to talk to tons of developers who see things in a different perspective than I do. And that's huge. That's important. It's good to talk to people. It challenged my views. It challenged the way that I was seeing things. I wasn't really pro 110 at that point. I do have to be honest that I was kind of always pulling for it a little bit, but I really did have some issues with both the and sorry, I invoked the if you had some big reveal there, but
Nope.
but yeah, I invoked it. I had some real issues with the I wasn't convinced 110 would have any chance of really activating in terms of game theory, a lot of other things, and I really was thinking that from a risk management perspective, it was better to say, hey, like, okay, this is going to cause a lot of chaos if it causes a chain split, things like this, and let's maybe not do that. that was basically the direction I was taking, but I've since changed my mind on that, and we can get into that a little bit later, but let me address the spam issue directly. So node cost is complicated, right? And there are a lot of people who think you need to that you don't have to run a full validating node. You can prune your node. You can have lower storage costs that way, right? You can run less than 200 gigabytes worth of the blockchain, and that's perfectly fine to still be validating all incoming transactions. You just don't have a complete record of the blockchain, right? But I definitely push back on that. It's unnecessary to have a full record of the chain, right? Because it's a sovereignty thing, right? Being able to hold the entire thing in a piece of hardware that you control, right? What if you want to seed your neighbor's node? What if your node goes down and everyone you're connected to only has a pruned node? How are you going to get your node back up and running, right? So I definitely think that it's okay in a pinch. You could run a node on lower hardware and still be a part of the network that way, but it definitely chips away at the whole sovereignty permissionlessness part of Bitcoin, right? And so I'm a huge advocate of running a full node and keeping the entire blockchain if you can, right? The UTXO set is a little more complicated, and I promise I'm getting to spam here. UTXO set is more complicated. The biggest impact there is in the download, the initial download of the blockchain, the initial blockchain download IBD, and UTXO set is starting to matter less and less through technical means. That changes are being put in to Bitcoin Core specifically. I hope some of these changes get merged into not sent into other implementations, but that are just doing fantastic work. There's one developer, his NIM handle is like Lawrence with a 0 or something like this. Anyway, but he's been doing great work, right? Making this download a lot faster, that you don't need as much memory to get it done, right? So the whole thing there is that there are technical solutions being put in for the node cost thing specifically, and this isn't to downplay it entirely, but it's funny that there are sort of two things true at the same time at the moment, that technical changes are being made to make the UTXO set issue a lot less of a problem, but at the same time, Core is making changes to avoid a tiny bit of UTXO set bloat, or so they say, in a harm reduction manner. So there's kind of mixed messages going on here in terms of what priorities are important in terms of spam. What I see the real issue of spam actually is that this is a DDoS attack on Bitcoin. This is an availability attack on Bitcoin. right? So the whole idea is that when you have non-monetary transactions that are competing for the same block space as monetary transactions, that is implicitly increasing the cost of accessing the Bitcoin network for everyone who's doing it for a legitimate purpose, right? And we're talking here in 2026, right? Fees are fairly low. I mean, they're not zero, but they're low, right? And we're not seeing full blocks all the time. But back in 2023, 2024, fees were astronomical, $50, $100, $200 just to get into the next block, right? And Bitcoin is a payment system, peer-to-peer electronic cash. That's the purpose, right? And sometimes you need to make a transaction, right? Maybe a big purchase can wait, right? But I mean, what if you really need to get money to someone on the other side of the world who's in an emergency, right? Like they can't pay their electricity bill, or there's been an emergency medical situation or something like this. Like sometimes you need money to move quickly, right? And Bitcoin was just not a reliable way to do that. It was pricing out. We talked about people from the global south before. It was just pricing out people who couldn't afford to spend 20, 30, 50% of the, or 100% of the Bitcoin that they were moving in the fee, right? And so these non-monetary transactions with a lot of arbitrary data, these are have their own incentive models. They're basically saying that Bitcoin is just the mechanism for their own economic game. Their whole thing was to sell the picture that they were putting on the Bitcoin blockchain and make money off that, right? So they can afford to pay these fees when they think that's in their interest, right? And so the entire thing was that 2023, 2024, Bitcoin was just way less usable to people on the base layer. And I think that's just ridiculous. I don't have some utopian notion, partially because I can do math, that Bitcoin is always going to be cheap on the main chain if we get the adoption we're looking for, right? When Bitcoin has 8 billion users, fees are going to be pretty high, right? But we'll have done adoption. People will have their Bitcoin, and there will be layer twos and other methods of scaling to get that done properly. One of the best arguments against that spam frenzy being a problem is actually that it stimulated layer 2 development a lot. Like Lightning got a lot more robust, and swaps in and out of Lightning got way more robust and cheaper, and things like this. New developments have come up, but at the crux of it, I see that arbitrary data on Bitcoin is ultimately competing for the throughput of scarce block space, and it's competing with monetary transactions. It's a hidden tax. It's really the same type of hidden tax that inflation is, right? It's inflating the cost of using this sound money, and it doesn't matter if things are kind of okay right now. We don't do cybersecurity on the good state. We do it on the worst case scenario. We do it on the bad case scenario, right? And if the bad case scenario is that these arbitrary data protocols can come in and cause massive fee spikes, maybe the network should at least try to do something about that to discourage these things from being so easy to exploit. And I do believe there are exploits. We can get into that also if you like. But yeah, my take on spam is that it's less about node cost, and it's more about the availability of the network.
Yeah, I really don't think it's about spam. I think spam's sort of been a red herring throughout all of this, or and it's a trigger word, and I think a lot of words get twisted. I do think it's about arbitrary data and non-monetary transactions and optimizing for the only use case. I think we should get into maybe the two CVEs. Quick one. You know the thing that happens. A bill shows up, taxes, a repair, some life thing, and the cash isn't there, but the Bitcoin is. And there's this little voice. Just sell a little. You've got enough. Every Bitcoiner knows how that movie ends. You sell, the thing rips 2 weeks later, and that little sliver you let go turns out to be the most expensive cup of coffee of your life. That's the exact moment Firefish was built for. You borrow against your Bitcoin instead of selling it. And the part that matters to me, it's non-custodial. Your coins sit in a multi-sig the whole time. You're not handing them to anybody and hoping, which is the thing that blew up in 2022. Don't sell your Bitcoin. Live off it. 30% off your first loan at firefish.io/ref equals matrix, code matrix. This episode is brought to you by Club Orange. If you've ever wanted to meet the people behind the orange-pilled accounts you follow, Club Orange is your map. It's the easiest way to meet Bitcoiners, find Bitcoin events, and find merchants accepting Bitcoin in your town. The whole network lives on your phone, and it's built around where you actually are. Download Club Orange today in the App Store or Google Play, and head to cluborange.org/matrix-podcast to get started. Your seed phrase is the most consequential sentence you'll ever own. And writing it on paper is the weakest place to put it. Stampseed is a titanium DIY kit that lets you hammer those words into solid metal. Fire resistant, waterproof, crush proof. 20 years from now, that piece of metal will still be there. Stampseed.com. Code Matrix gets you 15% off. That we were talking about in DM. And are those the exploits you're referring to?
Yes, absolutely. And if you want me to actually grab the CVE numbers, I do have them. But yeah, I'll let you finish your question.
Well, I could pull up some of the CVE stuff that I think you tweeted about it.
Yeah, I did. I was quoting Luke Dashjr, and it's funny. The day before we're recording this, I had a relatively prominent case of someone confusing me for Luke Dashjr. We do share the same first name and first initial of the last name, but David Bailey appeared to confuse me for Luke Dashjr and accused me of saying things that I didn't, and all the bad things that my boss is saying. And I gently asked what was he talking about, and he blocked me. So I've earned a David Bailey block, so good for me. But I do get sometimes people thinking that I resemble Luke Dashjr, not just in name but in appearance somewhat, so that's fun.
No, okay, no, I wasn't trying to confuse you.
No,
I have your tweets here. There are two specific vulnerabilities in Bitcoin Core that could have been fixed and avoided any talk of a fork. So you mentioned CVE 2023 50,428 bypass of data carrier size limit using op false op if. And you also mentioned CVE 2024 34,149 policy script size limits not enforced for TapScript. Can you maybe sort of illuminate us, or what were these sort of issues and what would have been avoided?
yes, absolutely. And my reason for mentioning Luke Dashjr was that I asked him what were the specific CVEs. He responded, and I made my own tweet. So I just want to give some credit there. And he is the author of both of these CVEs. So first I'll explain what CVE is. It's a database called Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. And this is basically a record of security vulnerabilities across literally anything you can think of, anything you can think of in terms of software, something like this. And a CVE is effectively a score of how bad a vulnerability is. Something that is lower on the scale will be 0 to 5, something like this. Higher criticality ones are 6, 7, 8. 9 or a 10. You'd better believe that something on the internet is extremely vulnerable and you need to go patch it right away. There have been a few of these, like 10 criticality CVEs, which basically meant that some hacker who has access to the exploit could just cherry pick people who are vulnerable and steal stuff or take stuff down or whatever it is. These things cause havoc when they happen. So the CVEs we're talking about, these are anyone can register a CVE, and this is one of the sort of arguments against these databases is that anyone can say here's a vulnerability that I've found, and it's not necessarily straightforward to verify, right? People have limited time, but regardless, So Luke Dashjr registered these two CVEs, vulnerabilities, into the CVE database, and said, okay, bypass of data carrier size limit using op false op if. I'll explain what this is. So inscriptions, which is maybe the proper term of what might be more commonly known as ordinals or BRC20 tokens, they all use this inscription, so-called inscription envelope. And what this is in Bitcoin script, intentionally, and it has to be in taproot script. That's why there's two of these CVEs. If you put an op false code, which means that Bitcoin script under this point is not going to execute. You put an op false code that says don't execute everything that follows this. Then you put an op if, which is a conditional. Don't ask me exactly why they chose op if. There are some technical reasons, but they put this op if envelope, they call it. And what it meant is that you could put anything after that op if, anything you want, basically up to the transaction size limit with data pushes, op push data. So this is how this arbitrary data is getting onto Bitcoin. These data pushes that are being fed through this op false op if mechanism. And I've seen there's a common security pattern that this is exactly like. Something called SQL injection, which is when if you have a data field on the internet, you can try to put like a colon and then a whole bunch of these query language commands and try to talk to the database underneath. And this was actually something that worked a lot. If you didn't properly sanitize your prompts, you could get an attacker use a similar thing that they're not supposed to, right? Like this kind of secret command. This op false op if is the secret command, and cause an exploit, do something they weren't supposed to do. This op false op if thing is something that was never intended by anyone, right? This wasn't designed into Bitcoin. This wasn't a feature, right? Someone had to find that, oh, if I tell Bitcoin script to ignore everything that follows these commands, I can just put a bunch of commands that have nothing to do with whether this transaction is consensus valid or not, but lets me stuff a lot of arbitrary data onto Bitcoin. And okay, I don't want to be like a content purist here. I don't care if the arbitrary data was a dump of Wikipedia or WikiLeaks or something like that, something so-called useful, right? Storing data in the system, right? Or whether it's just monkey JPEGs, something like that. No matter what, it's still doing this thing we talked about. Like it's competing for the throughput with monetary transactions. And since the point of what they're putting onto the chain is the data, the fee is something they're factoring into that, right? They're paying the fee to access the block space. They're not paying a fee to transfer sats from one entity to another. They're not making a Bitcoin transaction. Samson Moe, who is anti-110, said it pretty in a pretty distilled way here. Spam is any part of a Bitcoin transaction that isn't part of the monetary transaction itself, right? Simple. I'm probably not getting the exact quote, right? But that's the definition of spam on Bitcoin. If it's not doing something for the transfer of Satoshis from one UTXO to another, that's spam. So this false op if thing is one of the exploits they used. The other, the CVE 34149, policy script size limits not enforced for TapScript. This one is about that a limit that was previously enforced in other address types, SegWit and things that came before it, that was removed for Taproot. It shipped without this limit. So what it meant is that you could have scripts that were of a larger size in total, and the reasoning for this was to allow more, I'll call it explore space or more scriptability on Bitcoin, do more complicated things. But what it did was, in combination of that op false op if thing, is it meant that there really wasn't a limit to the amount of data you could stuff in one transaction. Again, taproot only. But what it meant was that you could actually get a transaction to the full extent of the witness discount. So not just the 1 megabyte so-called block size that isn't really the limit anymore. You could use 4 times that and get a 4 megabyte block. That's happened on multiple occasions. For the most part, congratulations to Marathon for allowing and finding 4 megabyte blocks filled with 1 JPEG. So that's good for them. But the combination of these two vulnerabilities is what results in the inscription issue, and what allows so much arbitrary data to come onto the chain. Now, the reason that this is controversial is that basically Bitcoin Core declined to implement fixes for these issues, and they are fixed on Bitcoin knots. So way back in 2024, 2025, there's a specific version of knots where Luke Dashjr put in fixes for this stuff. It's not hard to fix these issues by relay policy. And yeah, Knots has these fixes, and Core declined to implement the fixes. They basically said that, well, they made a couple of arguments. One was that actually that this is the intended behavior of taproot. The intended behavior of taproot is to allow this script expressiveness, allow this programmability, right? And I do think this is one of the areas where we have a lot of tension in the Bitcoin community. There is a group of developers who have the view that Bitcoin should be more programmable, and more should be done on Bitcoin, and to make it easier to script with Bitcoin, right? But I just think that adds more attack surface, and it takes Bitcoin further away from being money, from the core needs of storing your value and using as medium of exchange, right? And other arguments were that basically that this stuff is these things just aren't vulnerabilities, right? Like it might not have been the intended behavior what ended up happening, but these aren't bugs that data carrier size. The data carrier size option wasn't supposed to cover all data types. It was only for op return, things like this. So people in Core made arguments that are effectively denying that there is a vulnerability, that there is a risk that could be exploited in the first place. And again, to come back to kind of in the cybersecurity world, that's called ignoring risk. That's putting your head in the sand, right? It doesn't stop the thing from being real. It doesn't stop the effect from being real, but you're just ignoring it. There's another thing you can do in risk management called risk acceptance. This is just saying the risk exists, but the cost of doing anything about it is too much, and we're not going to do anything about it. If Core took that attitude, that would be one thing. They could be saying, okay, the situation is what it is, and we're just not going to do anything about it because it wouldn't fix any problems, right? But what they turned around and did is they blew out the op return limit, right? So they ignored that this stuff was a problem at all. And I call this out directly in defending Bitcoin. I do call this out directly. I think that was ignoring cybersecurity principles, and that was Bitcoin Core not living up to a proper risk management cybersecurity standard for all the good that they do otherwise in terms of keeping Bitcoin Core secure. They failed on this one, in my professional opinion.
It's interesting. I mean, I share your opinion, but it really is just that, in the sense that I think there is a difference of opinion here. I don't think they would see this as a vulnerability or an exploit. Maybe they see it as a feature, and they're entitled to their opinions. And I'm not going to get into maybe good faith and bad faith. Just it's a difference of opinion. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And one of the things I love about Bitcoin is there's no we in Bitcoin. It's just I, and we can all kind of come to our own conclusions. I look at it, along sort of the threat vectors of this is not optimizing for what I think is the only use case, which has its sort of negligible effects in terms of arbitrary data is arbitrary and there's extra, and there will always be incrementally some non-zero portion of arbitrary data. But optimizing for not the primary use case, which is some people's maybe choice, has, I think, other sort of vectors, in terms of physics and weight on the chain, links to the future. I think the ability to share the chain, to all run a node and not have to prune it and have less than and not be able to fully verify and have a fractured reality with your peers. I think it's about a shared reality. But you mentioned that, so Knots fixed this in 25.1, which meant that this happened somewhere around. What would do you know what maybe the CVE scores on the website were for these, or just anecdotally?
Yeah, these were moderate severity CVs, like given a 5 or something like this, and that was to the. I don't want to get this wrong, but I can look it up actually. Why don't I do that and not get this wrong? I know you have editing magic and everything. One of them has a score, and one of them it was declined to be provided a score because it was in dispute, essentially. Yeah. So the which one is this? The TypeScript size limit was given a 6.3 score, and it's marked as disputed. Okay.
34,149.
Yeah. Yes, that one. 34149. There are two scoring systems that give scores, and one of them didn't give a score. But another gave a 6.3, and
spread.
Yeah. Not giving a score is a little is unfortunate, but yeah, sometimes this stuff just doesn't get verified. I think the main reason for this is that it was considered disputed, right? And that was because some in Bitcoin Core, you can go onto the system and say that I dispute this, right?
Yeah, totally.
Dispute whether this is a vulnerability, right? The false op if was given a 5.3, right? And I'm not disagreeing with those at all. I'm not disagreeing with those scores. Like arbitrary data on Bitcoin, especially the specific mechanisms, this isn't something that is ending Bitcoin tomorrow. This is one of the things that I have kind of maybe differences with some of the people who are really pro 110. My view, I take a little bit more of a moderate view on this overall, in terms of that having some good consensus level limits on arbitrary data on Bitcoin is a good thing. And so therefore I'm directionally in favor of 110 and what it's aiming to do and all this. But at the end of the day, I don't see spam as this existential threat. It's back to that death by 1,000 cuts thing, though, in to a certain extent. It's even more down to kind of what you're saying about there's only one real use case for Bitcoin, right? And I do kind of share that in a real sense of that Bitcoin, the only reason I'm here is because Bitcoin solves the money problem, right? There are tons of people in Bitcoin, so-called monetary maximalists, maybe, who share that view and who are only here because of that property, right? I wouldn't give the first hoot about Bitcoin if it's just some blockchain technology. Like the technology itself is novel, and maybe there's some fun things to do if you like coding. A quote, and I don't want to really put him on blast on this from Merchant. It was recent, highlighting kind of this philosophical difference, maybe that if you, I hope I get this right. If you have a scripting system that lets you build exciting smart contracts on Bitcoin, then you're going to have arbitrary data. And where if you have the environment where it's exciting to build cool smart contracts, I think that's how he said, like it's exciting to build cool smart contracts, something like this. Sorry, but I'm not. Bitcoin isn't here for developers to be excited. You know what I mean? That's not the problem that Bitcoin is solving. Like, go do your AI stuff, or go play on Nostr, or any of whatever else. But Bitcoin being exciting to create cool smart contracts, like that just really, it gets me somewhere, in terms of that there is a real philosophical difference between the people, some of the people, not even all, who are doing the development, right? And this is after having lots of conversations with these people. Like, I respect them for their technical knowledge and all this, but I really don't get the push to make Bitcoin more programmable and more easy to do all of this other use case stuff. Because what do these use cases boil down to? Many of them, it's just making the next crypto casino easier to do. Zero snarks rollups that put a certain amount of proof onto Bitcoin. These have the potential to put a lot of data onto Bitcoin. And this stuff is really just things that make DeFi easier. Like, I just don't see how, at a protocol level, enabling this stuff is making Bitcoin better money. Exciting smart contracts isn't better money to me.
Yeah, that's what's amazing. That's what I love about Bitcoin is it's money. It's the best money. If it's optimized for other things, it brings in attention for other things. We're trying to sort of defeat the money printer. So I don't think we're going to economically get our way through this. We can't outspend the enemy in that regard. And I think that, if you think about death by 1,000 cuts, we all deal with, sort of things in our personal lives, and you think about how you handle it as an individual. Maybe there's a family member that every Thanksgiving they come over. It's kind of painful. And you deal with it for how many years and decades. And some family members, you're like, it's not going to happen anymore. They're just not going to come into my node, and they're not going to be with the people that are going to stick in my node with me here on my rule set and consensus, for better or for worse, if you have sovereignty. And I think, but if you think about at the end of a death by 1,000 cuts with Bitcoin, at the end of that is you'll own nothing and be happy. And so, I think I'm not crazy about, I don't want to get into names. I think it's about ideas, but the idea that 6 people sit in an office, a corporate office, and work on implementations is a very strange thing to me, and seems centralized, and doesn't seem incentivized for conservatism or low time preference thinking. It's that we got to get something done. We have to prove to the funders we're doing stuff, and that has its own corrupting, I think, just incentives or just, yeah. So, yeah. Why do you think, let's talk about BIP 110. Do you think that this, increases risk or reduces risk going forward? Risk is very vague there too.
BIP 110 is such a nebulous topic. And I mean, all of these issues that we've been discussing this whole episode, or that have been in the space for a really long time, BIP 110 is kind of a culmination of many of these things. And it is a little bit of that. There isn't one thing that caused it. The opportune issue is the straw that broke the camel's back, right? It pushed certain individuals in the space to think that this is not going to work any longer, and we cannot be in the same consensus as others in the space who appear to not have the same priorities on Bitcoin as money. So BIP 110. Okay. I do support BIP 110, and I believe the least risky scenario in the space overall is for BIP 110 to activate smoothly. And what I mean by that, just to be really clear, is that BIP 110 is going to activate no matter what, right? On August 7th, approximately, BIP 110 is going to start BIP 110 nodes are going to start rejecting blocks that don't signal. Okay, this is happening. But activating smoothly or activating successfully to me means it convinces enough miners to signal and make that the rules of Bitcoin. The longest chain, the heaviest chain with the most proof of work. Right. So that's BIP 110 succeeding and succeeding smoothly. Just to talk about risk for a second here. The reason I came to this determination, it was actually I had the opposite opinion for a while. Through the course of writing Defending Bitcoin, I had a chapter on governance. The governance issue is exactly what you were talking about. The 6 people sitting in an office making decisions, and that's not completely fair. But yeah, the last time I talked about this on a pod, I actually had.
Well, okay, it's not completely fair, but there's a quote, and Merch said that all the BIP proposals get edited, reviewed before proposing, so that they're sort of in line. They get reviewed and sort of affirmed through. He said 5 or 6 people, which is a major sort of funnel for the greater thing. Just to lay out a real quote there. And again, it's about sort of ideas and process, not individuals or messengers. But
no, agreed. But so a series of articles that I really like is the Capture series by Hodlers. And I mean, I'm lucky enough to have met Hodlers a few times, spent a fair bit of time. I consider him a friend, and he is one of the most high integrity individuals you'll ever meet, and he's not compromising on that either. He's not grinding an axe. He's not funded by anybody, and he's exposing real issues, right? Real issues of process, real issues of funding. I've talked to people from the other side. I've spent a lot of time conversing with Merch. We've unfortunately never like spoken on a podcast or something like that, but we've had a lot of back and forth, and I respect him. I do. And Mike Schmidt, I forget exact title with Brink, but basically with Brink, exactly. We've had some good conversations, and it was funny that after the last time I was on a pod talking about this exact thing, this people kind of in office buildings, because Brink has offices, Chaincode has offices, or it's like I forget which one has which city. Spiral has one in the Bay Area, something like this. It is Bitcoin Core. What's this?
Localhost?
Yeah, must, yeah. But there are like physical offices in the Bay Area, New York, London. Those are the big ones. Maybe there's others, but where core developers come and I mean they're doing their thing. They're doing development work. I mean, I studied computer science in school. I know what coding is. I know what development processes are. I've worked with the developers through my entire career. You don't avoid it in the cybersecurity space, even if I am focusing on factories and stuff, pipelines, what have you. But so I know about development processes and what goes on there. It's, I'm no stranger to that. There's a lot of minutia and a lot of boring things, right? That being in a physical office together can clear up, and so I mean there's one side of it that it's just a benefit to work in the same space as colleagues. I've heard that a lot of these developer conferences, a lot of them end up just working together on different projects because they're physically in the same space and can get more done. Right. I respect that. That's okay. You know.
Yeah, I think that I didn't mean to, but. Yeah, I think it helps people collaborate and get a shared vision, which I think in a certain situation is a centralizing factor.
Exactly. No, that's been my entire thing here is that call it what you want, but Bitcoin Core isn't this cypherpunk, a bunch of guys and gals in their basements doing this on the side just because they want to work on the best money system the world has ever seen. It's developers doing this for a living, and many of them coming straight out of school and going to work on Bitcoin full time under grants and funds and stuff, right? And I'm not saying anything malicious here. I'm just saying that this is different. This is a different thing to what many might think is going on in terms of open source development, right? And Adam Back has said quite a bit that the development process in Bitcoin, the governance process in Bitcoin, and I'm remembering the original thread for this in the back of my mind, by the way, that we've got a whole other thing to return to, but that it's based on rough consensus from the IETF. Sorry, I forget what that stands for, but the groups that made the protocols that made the internet, basically, that came together in working groups of technical people and decided how the internet was going to work so that everyone could cooperate and these networks could actually exist in the real world. Great goal. Bitcoin Core development is supposedly based on this rough consensus model, but it's done in a way that is vastly different from essentially these working groups that are working on these low-level policy decisions. And ultimately, Bitcoin Core is responsible to its users, right? And I think with the whole op return issue, they simply ignored their user base. They ignored the objections of their users. They ignored a more than 4-to-1 opposition on the change itself. And what gets thrown back to me by others is that these oppositions were from people who weren't contributing to the project. And so somehow you have to be a contributor to this specific open source project. You basically have to make that your full-time life, or you don't get a say in big decisions that have impacts on the network. And I just don't think that that's the right way to think about this. People can choose to run their node or not. They can choose which node software to run. And I think the signal, BIP110 aside entirely, that is really powerful is people migrating to knots and using knots and building other implementations and saying to core, like, I didn't agree with this change. It might have had all of the technical reason to do it, but I've also argued against that original op return changes reasoning, that they were looking at it again as differences of opinion, right? That they were looking at one perspective only, right? In my view, they were not looking at the security features of having a default limit to what you should be allowed to put in an op return, what gets relayed. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, it's just that I think it's tunnel vision. It's a bubble, and it's a development culture that is optimizing Bitcoin for a certain thing. And in my view, that certain thing is being able to make Bitcoin more programmable and accept more use cases, which will attract more developers and more funding into the system. That's about as cynical as I'm going to get here. I'll pause now because that was
it's interesting looking at the network from all different angles. I think it's hard if you're not mining to look at the network as a miner. Right? Obviously, if you're not hodling, it's hard to look at the network like a Bitcoiner or a hodler. Maybe there's different ways to hodl that's less sovereign, and maybe you don't have sats in self-custody, or you have the ETF, or you have stocks with price exposure. But I think if you're running a node and hodling, you kind of have a different perspective. Some of these perspectives are, some miners run nodes and choose their own templates and different things, right? And so some of these converge. And you might be mining in a mining farm and have co-investors who have different incentives than you. But try to think about it as like a node runner. Like if I had discovered node running, right? Maybe I had no money to buy Bitcoin. Maybe I came across some equipment. I was like, wow, I could plug into this network and run a node. And I just try to think about like what that would mean. What would be my incentives and sort of disincentives to run the node, and what would change things? Like as a node runner, if I bought my son a node and didn't give him any sats and said, run this thing, and he's running it year after year, like what incentive, short or long term, what benefit would the node runner get just for running a node with more data versus less? And even sort of per block. I mean, we could look at maybe fiat incentives or short-term incentives, or you could argue for long-term incentives for miners. You can look at maybe the incentives of the purchaser of a non-monetary data transaction, or someone who wants to put arbitrary data on the blockchain, and maybe they don't feel it's arbitrary. Maybe they feel it's important. or some they like that use case and they don't want to use other protocols for this use case. What because there's three parties. I feel there's that transaction. It's not in sort of the moment you think it's just the purchaser and the miner, but the node is a part. The node runners as individuals are part of that transaction. What benefit to them would be to just I'd rather run rules with greater arbitrary data embedded in the rules.
Yeah, I mean, in that hypothetical, all that's doing.
And I
is
know
increasing...
I oversimplified policy and consensus. I'm not trying to,
Yeah. No, that's okay. But I think the thing there is that a more arbitrary data really does just increase the marginal costs over time, right? It makes it more expensive if you need to
at some
upgrade
level,
hardware.
right?
At some level, yeah. More CPU cycles to validate a block. That's a thing. More bandwidth required, right? If blocks are more full. So it's incremental though. It's like I do think it's impossible to separate the idea of running a node from being a hodler, right? I think running a node and being a hodler are really the things that go hand in hand. And I lay it out in Defending Bitcoin similarly, that there are developers who write the software, the node software. There are the node runners themselves who run the software, and these are the people who enforce the rules of the network, right? Miners provide the security for the network, and they find the block space by finding the valid hashes, right? And the more competing with each other to find the next block, the more secure the network is, right? And the dynamic between the node runners and the miners is a really tricky one, and that's a whole aspect to the 110 thing that's tricky. The game theory about that, but the hodlers, I think, is really a whole other thing, right? That those who have a lot of their wealth stored in Bitcoin, who've discovered Bitcoin and decided that this is the way I'm going to store my value, and maybe you go further and decide I'm going to advocate for Bitcoin publicly and all this, but the hodler who uses their own node to validate and enforce the rules of the network, and I think enforcing the rules of the network also meaning that it doesn't change into something that they don't agree with, right? And maybe this comes back to the policy versus consensus thing. Did Core really make a change because they didn't change consensus? Well, on the one hand, no, they didn't make a consensus change, right? They didn't change what is valid in a Bitcoin block, but they did make a real change in the network in terms of the default of the reference implementation. And that default is something that has an effect. I argue that it has an effect. And Renaud Cooney has a lot of great data on, he's basically been documenting the health of the network, essentially, is the website that he's got, the bitcoinportal.com, I think is the URL. But large op return increased after Core announced that they were going to remove the policy. So you could always get around the policy. But when they announced that they were going to remove the limit, suddenly there was a big flurry of people going around the limit, right? So the signal mattered. The signal matters. That's what I was getting at there. So hodling, using your node to verify that your hodl Bitcoin really is there, is the fundamental property of self-sovereignty. And the biggest incentive to run a Bitcoin node is tied to your personal stake in the network. I do think you have to have that stake for node running to be a thing. But the corollary goes that we want to mint more hodlers and we want to mint more node runners. That's how I think about it. We want to show new hodlers that it's worth it to run a node. And why? Run your own. Decentralize the network. There's a whole boogeyman concept in BIP110 circles about economic nodes, nodes that validate transactions, incoming transactions. But merchants are important. If you are a merchant, accept Bitcoin through your own node. That has economic weight, and make a decision about what you're going to accept as Bitcoin or not. That has a real effect on the network. And yeah, but spinning up nodes just to say I enforce the network, I don't think that is the same thing here. One node, one vote doesn't really hold. But a lot of nodes acting together work. That's how I'm seeing everything with BIP110. And it's also how I see node running generally. Like, if you just run a node, but you don't otherwise participate in the Bitcoin network, it's sort of if a tree falls in the woods situation, right? Did it really happen, or does it really matter? Something like this. There was a guy who spooled up thousands of nodes in the cloud as a project. Actually, his name is Bit Projects, coincidentally, in my own telling of it. And he's a pro BIP110 guy, actually, but he spooled up thousands of BIP110 nodes just to show that you can. And 110 opponents have latched onto that, saying, well, yeah, this just shows that all of these nodes might not be real. Now, I don't think that's the case. I've met dozens, maybe even hundreds. I don't know how many people I've met at a few conferences these last few months who say, I am running a BIP110 node. I've started node running for the first time because I care about this, and I'm running BIP110. That's real. This isn't a Sybil attack. BIP110 is real. BIP110 has node runners, who I believe are hodlers, who I believe are merchants. Right. BIP110 has weight of hodlers, economic weight, whatever you want to call it. So I'm not sure I answered your question again, but
no, I think it's really important. I think it's a great answer. You know, I think one of the things I think about how rare it is for anyone. Excuse me. Running a node is in some ways just more rare than owning any amount of Bitcoin. And
super rare.
It's too rare. And it's more valuable in some ways in terms of decentralization and the dream, because I don't think the threat is the centralization of Bitcoin ownership. The money printer doesn't care about how many coins the enemy holds. They don't have any, they can't even sell the coins. They would devalue the own thing they're trying to buy then or hold. The way the government doesn't really sell gold, publicly, the United States government, they just hold this asset they can't sell. They can't really borrow against it. It's, and we don't even know if they have it. And if less people are running nodes, we wouldn't know who has the Bitcoin. You would only know what and you get to a place where you have a permissionless store of value, maybe, a hard capped, decentralized store of value that's not being used as money because it's never been truly optimized at the highest level for money. And that's why I'm not crazy about layer 2 optimization or any of these things. I think all these things should be done on testnet or side chains or other chains and proven over a long period of time. Very hard to get in. I want to talk about, what you think you're the chances of BIP110 succeeding and what success means. We talk a lot on this show about the circular economy, Bitcoin moving peer-to-peer, staying out of the fiat system. Club Orange is how you plug into that in real life. It's the easiest way to meet Bitcoiners, find Bitcoin events, and find the merchants accepting Bitcoin right in your town. Less doom scrolling the timeline, more shaking hands with the people actually building this thing where you live. It's on iOS and Android. Download Club Orange today in the App Store or Google Play. Stampseed is the most analog object in your Bitcoin stack. No batteries, no firmware, no third-party trust. just a titanium DIY kit that lets you hammer your seed words into solid metal. Fire resistant, waterproof, crush proof. The simplest, dumbest, most reliable backup for the most important sentence you'll ever own. Stampseed.com, code MATRIX for 15% off. I set up my own Firefish account, and I'll tell you exactly why. I've spent years on this show telling people don't sell. Low time preference, hold the line. And then you live long enough and life hands you a reason. A down payment, a business, a kid. And you're sitting there staring at your stack thinking, am I about to break my own rule? Firefish was the first thing I found that let me keep it. You put up your Bitcoin as collateral. You get the liquidity you need, and you never give up custody. Your keys stay in multisig. Nobody's relending your coins behind your back. You don't have to choose between living your life and keeping your stack. And that's the whole point. Don't sell your Bitcoin. Live off it. First loans 30% off your fees. Firefish.io/ref equals matrix. Code matrix. Links in the show notes. How do you look at that?
Yeah, well, and just the whole thing with node running, like just one last point on that, because I agree that it's important, and I do think the risk of losing the decentralization is really losing the ability for the plebs to be able to enforce the rules of the network. It's the force that stopped the miners from being able to choose to change the rules on us, right? Back in 2017, right? What I've been struggling with, and this gets into the success of it or not, and now I can return to that. So when I was writing Defending Bitcoin, I was going through the whole governance thing, and I included that a governance risk is a chain split, right? A chain split being the result of effectively a hard fork or a failed soft fork, if you want to call it that. It's sort of technically a hard fork no matter what, but whatever. A chain split, splitting into two new chains, and the chaos and uncertainty that goes along with that, right? Losing whole chunks of the network, not knowing which one is going to be the dominant chain, keep the economic value, all of this. And I'm writing this, reading it back to myself, and just thinking, if we can avoid going down the road of causing a chain split, that would be optimal. And that's the thing that I'm going to advocate for, even if I don't like spam, and even if I'm not thrilled with the governance issues that have been going on. Okay, then I get to the point of talking it over more. Things are starting to heat up. This is post Prague, I think, which it was mid-June, was the last time I really was kind of talking to people about this in person. But where I had conversations was about what does it look like for a soft fork to be pulled off in practice, right? And what do the game theory scenarios look like? And where I think the flaw in my reasoning was that if we just say, okay, maybe 110 isn't the right idea here, causing this chaos on the network isn't a good idea. Enough people say that, and BIP 110 backs down and decides to try it a different way, build consensus differently. That's maybe the optimal version of this that, for example, guys like Giacomo or Samson are advocating for, right? That their opposition to 110 is a lot to do with just effectively not achieving widespread consensus throughout the network, which I appreciate that view to a large extent, because we can get back to this in terms of the risk. But in terms of what would that train is that ship has sailed. The train has left the station. BIP 110 is activating, and there is a big movement for this, right? And my saying maybe this isn't the right idea here, even if I otherwise support it, that's not changing anyone's minds, right? And so I looked at it and it's like, okay, well, if this thing is definitely happening, what do the scenarios look like? And the scenario where BIP 110 just simply convinces the miners to flip the bit signal for 110, as soon as some start doing it, the game theory proposal is that everyone's going to do it to avoid their blocks being invalidated, because ultimately losing the economic incentive for mining is the driver here, right? So the whole thing is that's the proposition, that at the last minute the miners are going to come in and they're going to signal, and that's going to be it, right? And that scenario, we get a year of new rules. That's it. Okay, we don't get all of the negatives of the other side. So let me get into what that would look like, right? What I thought was that, okay, my line of thinking was, if BIP 110 convinces so few people that it gets like no hash rate, it doesn't find a block for a days, right? That they'll just abandon this, right? And guys like Mechanic had said things like, well, yeah, if we don't get this right, if we don't get the game theory right, if we don't convince the miners to signal, we'll just abandon it dead on arrival. And that would be something. I did know and believe that many people would leave Bitcoin if 110 fails, and that would be a shame. But what started to come out afterwards was that things like, okay, well, if the miners don't choose to signal, then the miners are enemies of Bitcoin, enemies of the plebs having the control. And so we are going to just change the proof of work algorithm and split off onto another chain, and that's going to be it. And I take them at their word, Luke Dashjr, that this is the decision tree. The decision tree ends with a hard fork off of Bitcoin if BIP 110 doesn't succeed. And that scenario is terrible to me. That scenario is that many of the best people, many of the most hardcore monetary maximalists would leave Bitcoin, go onto a new chain. Those saying that 110ers are the new Bcashers would be kind of right, kind of. And what remains of Bitcoin would be people that, okay, maybe they believe Bitcoin is money, but maybe they see it in a different light, right? The development cohorts who see richer scripting as being a positive thing, who don't see who deprioritize the security angle and the conservative nature that monetary maximalists, what have you, are encouraging. Yeah, Bitcoin would really, I think, go a lot further towards being this thing that is controlled by primarily the developers and the people putting money into Bitcoin funding. And I don't know, I would be seriously shaken in terms of my confidence in Bitcoin going forward. I definitely have some soul searching to do. I'm not going to say that I would leave Bitcoin or I would go off to this fork or anything like this. I certainly wouldn't sell my Bitcoin, but definitely I would be disappointed that things have gotten so bad that a lot of the monetary maximalists feel that the only thing to do is fork off. I really advocate for, in the position where BIP 110 fails, right? Just admit defeat and get off that thing ASAP, right? Get where I landed was let's give this a shot, right? But if the shot fails, okay, come back to Bitcoin, keep the fight going, right? And I hope that turns out to be more true than not. That in the case where BIP 110 does not succeed, that people still who are pro BIP 110 still stay on Bitcoin and still advocate for more adoption, good governance, decentralization, security, all of these things. Now, you asked me about what do I think the odds are of success. I don't have a crystal ball.
Oh, I didn't mean to ask you to put a number on it too.
No, but I think there's a real shot, right? The dynamics of BIP 148 back in 2017, I do feel are really different from the dynamics of right now with BIP 110. I've had conversations with people from back in 2017 who were really on the ground, really involved. I wasn't in the space at the time. I acknowledge that. And there's a lot of different perspectives on this. But a lot of people who are pro BIP 110 see BIP 148 as the example, the exemplar that we go off of for why BIP 110 can succeed. And the game theory plays it out. I had another tweet just a couple of days ago now and then this was Start 9. I retweeted Start 9 that on one side you have you flip a bit, right? And that's the only effect on you, right? You flipped a bit, you're signaling. And on the other side, you have the risk of losing your block reward entirely and all of this other bad stuff, right? And I said, if I were a risk manager at a mining pool or at a mining operation, more generally mining company, I would say that this is the risk scenario. The decision is up to management. The decision is up to management if they think that, okay, maybe there's other external things here. Maybe there are other reasons to resist 110. Do I think it's possible for BIP 110 to fail? Absolutely. Miners can just ignore. That is the gamble that those putting 110 forward are taking, is that the miners will just simply choose to ignore. But miners have to be ready. They would be grossly, negligently irresponsible if they're not ready to flip that bit. Right? They need to be ready, because if it starts happening, it's going to go from 1% to 100 on a dime. Right? So where we're at right now, I'm assuming this episode is going to come out before activation. I don't know. You might have a longer backlog, but
I think it will. It's going to come out soon.
Yeah, good. That we're going to see if what 110 has put forward is going to play out, if the miners do in fact go ahead and signal. It's been pointed out to me that it's not riskless to simply signal for 110. You could choose to be mining on a chain that eventually becomes the shorter one or have less proof of work, right? What I say to that is that miners ultimately, if they're rational actors, rational-ish actors, they're out for their self-interest. The option that optimizes their self-interest is to simultaneously signal for 110 and always mine on the heaviest chain, like they've always been doing. And that's not necessarily a great outcome for 110, but if everyone makes that decision, or 51%, 55% makes that decision, then BIP 110 wins. And if 55% makes that decision, everyone makes that decision. Maybe one unlucky miner gets a block reorganized or invalidated. But this is going to be quick. I predict that this is going to be quick. We'll know right away what happened, what's going to be the outcome.
Yeah, I see it a lot of the same way. Just kind of riffing on it. I mean, I think in terms of trying to quantify how big the movement is or where consensus is, I think right now what makes it difficult to judge is this is practice. It's not like Allen Iverson said. This ain't a game yet. The game hasn't even started. We're all talking about practice. I think if BIP 110 doesn't succeed, I think that the miners are facing a choice, and it's higher risk, higher reward. I think the risk is higher if they don't flip the bit, but I think if they act in that way, I think they can buy the network. They get to own it. In some ways, if they show that the nodes work for the miners, which the way that I think that goes in that scenario, the miners are the boss. The nodes work for free then, and that's sort of, I don't know how sustainable that is, because the miners get paid.
Can I respond to
Sure.
that directly? Because
Yeah.
I have an optimistic take here that maybe is a little, I don't know. It's less. I'm not seeing the same downside, and here's why. So 2017 showed that the miners can't force the nodes to adopt a change, right? If BIP 110 doesn't succeed, what that means is that a group of nodes can't, in theory, force the miners to adopt a change they don't want. And what that would mean is that you need consensus. You need both groups, right? And the reason I believe this, right, the dynamics of 148, as I see it, are that 148 was really just pushing miners over the edge on something they were basically already agreeing to. They just didn't want to lose face, or they wanted a block size increase on top of SegWit activation, right? So they agreed to activate SegWit, something they were already kind of okay with, in the face of 148. 148 was a pressure, but it wasn't forcing them wholesale to adopt something they didn't want to do, right? And so that's the reason I think there's a difference here with 110, is that it's effectively saying we, a group of nodes with unquantifiable numbers. I mean, there's estimates, right? 15% of the network, 17% of the network. Some percentage of that is real for sure. Some of those are not seen. We don't see many nodes who are only visible on Tor, right? Those are still nodes. They're still connected to other peers, but we don't see them on these aggregators, right? There are nodes. There are economic actors who are putting their weight into the system, who are going to start invalidating blocks, right? But this wasn't something that the miners were effectively all already primed for, right? And so if this fails, if BIP 110 fails, I think what it will have shown is not so much that the nodes are working for the miners. It's that one group can't force a consensus change on the other. You need both. That would be something much more acceptable that I could get my head around, that Bitcoin is in fact conservative in that small groups cannot force their will on another. Okay, now I've just spent a little bit talking about how the positives of BIP 110 failing, right? Okay, the other side. What BIP 110 succeeding will have showed is that a group of node runners can in fact say that, hey, we're going to put in a soft fork. It matters that it's a soft fork, by the way. A hard fork, the miners can basically just say, well, yeah, screw you. But a soft fork is different. A soft fork means that the entire rest of the network implicitly agrees and accepts the fork, right? Because they'll continue to accept those blocks with the tighter rules, no matter what. In the absence of a competing rejection of the soft fork, the miners are left with a binary choice: comply with the soft fork or not, right? And an explicit URSF as opposed to UASF, user activated soft fork, user rejected soft fork, is saying that we are going to reject blocks that signal for the new soft fork. Okay, that mechanism might be the thing that would have stopped 110, because what a URSF would do is it says to miners, there's a fork anyway, pick your side. That's what it does. And one of the big objections to 110 going in that I hear from serious people is that it has real bad implications for Bitcoin's governance, right? If a small minority of the network participants are able to make a rule change, right? And I just don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. The intolerant minority has decided that conditions cannot go on, and has decided to put in this soft fork change. And there has amazingly been no actual technical resistance in terms of code. There have been prediction markets. There have been offers to bet is this going to succeed or not, but there hasn't been a widespread rejection of the soft fork. Now, okay, by the time this comes out, who knows what's going to happen? But I really do not see it happen. I really do not see a URSF happening by activation date here. We're down to the last few weeks here, a couple of weeks. They don't have enough time to coordinate that. They've lost their chance. So what that means is that miners have this game theory thing in front of them. Risk getting blocks rejected or don't. And if enough of them decide to ignore, okay, well then the consensus building mechanism didn't work. The art of persuasion wasn't successful. And I would say that there's some validity to that also. But at the end of the day, BIP 110 succeeding would not be a governance failure. It would show that to stop a hostile soft fork, you need to explicitly reject it with code. And BIP 110 failing, we would learn something else too, that maybe you can't. One group can't change consensus easily, and I don't think that's as bad of a situation.
I think we'll find out either way. It's kind of binary. We're going to find out how Bitcoin works and think really how the world's going to work. And I really do think it's binary. And I think a lot about how it's binary and what it means to have consensus and to be out of consensus. And I really do believe that we agree on more than we disagree. And I try to think through that. And I think that to kind of agree on more, if you have people that agree on, some people like more and some people like less. Well, to get to more, you have to have some less, right? We all agree on less, and then there's some people that want more. And I think about consensus, like you go to the beach, and no analogy is perfect, but there's externalities, but there's some sort of consensus about how far to go from the shore into the water. And the people who go furthest out are kind of out of consensus with the pack, because you can't go out forever and to a point where you don't even have time to come back. And things like the further out you go, the more risk you have. The conditions can change, right? And there's externalities day to day, right? You can have a sunny day, a rainy day, lightning, thunder, big waves, little waves, riptide, all these different things. But generally speaking, there's consensus about how safe it is to go into the water and how it gets less safe the further you go. And the people that are further out are in consensus with the people that they're out of consensus with. The people that are in are just out of consensus. I'm rambling here, but I think there's a way to kind of view consensus. And I think that it's sort of the people that want more data are the 20%, and 80% already agree that less data is fine. It's kind of one way I'm looking at it. And I agree that people who are not further out agree that, or might think, some of those people might think it's safe to go further out or have thoughts, but I think you can kind of see where consensus lies is sort of the riddle we're solving for. And part of that, I think, is because we're not really at game time yet. So it's hard to see true behavior in that regard.
No, I love that. David Bailey has been declaring victory, right? And as you say, it's still only practice. I mean, maybe he thinks that the anti-110 is the 95 Bulls, and they're gonna go in and beat the Jazz one more time. You know what I mean? But yeah, maybe it's the Well, okay, I don't want to do a I don't want to do a full sports analogy because I'm not as up on that anymore. But um, yeah, I'm a Seattle Seahawks fan, inherited, and there was all this hype that the year the Seahawks won the first Super Bowl the Seahawks won. There was all this hype that Peyton Manning and the Broncos were gonna be the antidote to them. They had the best offense in the league, right? And the Seahawks had the best defense, right? And then it gets to game time, and the best defense just steamrolls over this so-called best offense, right? So who knows? Anything can happen. That was a good day in my household. That's getting to be a long time ago now. Funnily enough, I didn't even watch the Seahawks win their last Super Bowl because it was in the middle of the night for me. Made some choices, but the whole thing with consensus, right? It's not game time yet. Exactly. It's not so simple as those who want data and those who don't. Maybe this can sort of.
I know I
back.
oversimplified it. I was just trying to. I have this urge to describe where you just see consensus form in a situation all the time, and where it might, and we never know what anyone's individual thoughts are, and we don't know who supports who in their different choices, but you could kind of see where there's a hub.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the reason that this is actually contentious and like a little bit difficult, just because this was in the right direction. And I think this is important for the conversation, is that it's a little bit more about do you care about Bitcoin as money, or do you care about it as programmable money, right? And is the programmability of Bitcoin and the extent of the programmability of Bitcoin, to what extent is that part of the value proposition? And I do believe that's the cultural disagreement here. And so-called conservative Bitcoiners, I would consider myself one, who think that any upgrade really needs to show its value to the network. That's undermined by things like having there are a bunch of these, they call them hooks, that were put into SegWit that allow changing a version number, a version bit, so that they can actually put in changes to the way SegWit works without needing a hard fork. It becomes a soft fork. There now becomes rules without needing a hard fork, right? And other things like this. There's this taproot annex, which is effectively a place of unlimited data, intentionally unlimited data can be put there in this taproot annex, and theoretically there are layer 2 protocols that could benefit, like a full overhaul of the Lightning network could benefit from this taproot annex. But the thing with it is that, back to kind of the idea of arbitrary data. I don't mean arbitrary in terms of content. I mean in amount, right? The damaging thing has never been about.
I agree, yeah. Or substance. So not form, but like what the transaction represents, which I think we could figure out through data, whether it's a monetary or a non-monetary transaction.
Yeah, well, so one example of non-monetary transaction is the use of open timestamps, for example, right? And they use opreturn.
Yep.
I do believe even they're less than 40 bytes. 40 bytes is enough for a hash that can effectively represent any amount of data in the world. You can hash a group of hashes, right? You can take the hash of a bunch of documents, and you can prove that those documents existed at that one time, and that's a timestamp. I'm not the biggest fan of open timestamps, but they're paying the fee and they're not using an outsized amount of the transaction. Sats are still moving, right? Sats are still moving, and fee is being paid, and the amount of data in the transaction isn't huge. It's the amount. It's affecting the throughput. It's affecting the total fee rate. That's the thing I have concerns about, and that's what I think actually has the potential to kill real adoption. And the thing with it is that many of these things that would give Bitcoin more programmability, just allow more ways to use Bitcoin in ways that price out more boring uses of Bitcoin. Just sending to cold storage, right? Making a simple payment on the Lightning Network. Those things theoretically get more expensive the more quote unquote use cases there are on Bitcoin, right? And so it's a philosophical difference, right? We need to scale Bitcoin. We do. That's true. I don't disagree with that. We need to make it so that Bitcoin is accessible to people and we're not relying on trusted third parties for 95% of the population. At the same time, though, I really think it's something like, what's another sports analogy? You don't skate where the puck is, you skate where the puck is going.
Gretzky,
right?
yeah.
But the whole thing with that is that we don't know where we're going to be in 20 years, right? I think development is skating too far.
Yeah, so I think we know kind of where we don't want to be, though. I think that's kind of important to have those guardrails. I think where I get back to consensus, I'm thinking of these circles. It's like you have people who think Bitcoin is just money. And you have people who think Bitcoin is money and other things, maybe. And then you have people who think Bitcoin is just other things. I think those people are out of consensus, that it would be just other things. So now we're back down to where we have consensus is Bitcoin is money and Bitcoin might be other things, but not just other things. So I still think that paints a picture that we have consensus around Bitcoin is money. And I think that's where consensus will continue to organically move unless it was somehow prevented from moving in that direction.
Yeah, like,
well,
I think where we are here is that if bit 110 fails, actually, I think where we are is that we are kind of ossifying on the status quo where we are. It's going to be very difficult to put in future upgrades.
So,
go ahead.
Well, one thing I want to ask you about, I'm so sorry to interrupt. But I'm kind of, so failure, I think, is kind of, can be seen in a different way, but from a code perspective, does BIP 110 have a failed state? Does BIP 110 recognize failure?
No. It's going to activate and it's going to start rejecting blocks.
So even with
that
zero
chain
hash, it will just live in some form. I'm trying to, is that an overhanging threat of some kind that's, or is that a nothing burger?
Yeah, the nothing burger. I'm at team nothing burger on that one.
Gotcha.
It's 37 lines of code, right? It otherwise conforms to Bitcoin as we know it, right? And that includes the difficulty adjustment. So the thing there is that if it has super low hash rate, it's got to get to the next difficulty adjustment, and it's got to get to the point of the difficulty adjustment can go in factors of 4, right? So if you had 1% hash rate, you get to the next difficulty adjustment, and you would get from 100% to 25% of the difficulty needed, right? But you'd still only have 1%. You're still not mining a block every 10 minutes. You'd be mining a block every 250 minutes, right? Every 4 hours, right? So still not frequent. Then you had to get to the next one, and then you suddenly you're getting closer, right? Bitcoin Cash had to hard fork to change the difficulty adjustment, right? And ultimately, that's what's being threatened. Is that a proof of work change, not a difficulty change, but actually just changing the proof of work algorithm is what would solve this. But the reason why BIP 110 can't catch up is that even if they started to get more hash rate, started to get more hash rate and even maybe became the longest chain somehow through different difficulty adjustments, it wouldn't have as much proof of work accumulated. And that's what the rest of the Bitcoin network follows. So
Right.
if by some miracle half of the hash eventually decides to go for BIP 110, it just wouldn't catch up. It would have to be very, very quick, right? Like there would be some period of uncertainty, but it's all going to resolve really quickly in my analysis of the game theory. I can be proven wrong. I could be wrong, but my analysis of the situation is that if smooth activation doesn't occur immediately, all the miners virtually signal for 110, all the blocks go 110 right away. The opposite is going to happen. 110 will have 1% of the hash rate, and that'll be that. And yeah, it'll fork off. Oh, and well, by fork off, like eventually, the decision by BIP 110 node runners will be to run a different version of the software that uses a different proof of work algorithm and says we're not running ASICs anymore, we're running GPUs again. That's what would happen.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting. I wonder how much, because I agree with you in either direction, a fast outcome is probably best. I wonder how much just the hope for that is hopium in and of itself. It's going to be very interesting. It's complex.
Well, I don't think it's hopium, though. I don't think it's hopium. I think there's a real chance that the miners might look at this and say, "Yep, I'll take the lower risk option," and that's it. But in terms of if we're talking second and third order effects, that's something you said like right at the beginning there. Basically, second and third order effects, if they are concerned with precedent and governance issues and are worried that hey, what is actually the effect if BIP 110 goes through, then I could see them sticking to their guns and only moving if enough other large actors move, right? But there's only one way to guarantee that, right? And that's if the CEOs of Foundry and Antpool and F2 Pool all get on the phone together and say, hey, I'm not going to do this, right? And I think that would
what
be
if they
bad
get a
for Bitcoin.
letter? What if, you say, I mean, we might think, or we not, what you or I think, someone might think that it's irrational for the miners not to flip the bit, but we just don't know what miners are incentivized and at what level. We can speculate, we can be miners, we could think how we would act. You'd say, oh, if a miner, a big pool didn't want to flip the bit, maybe they would lose market share to an entity that did, but maybe the market share receives a letter to tell them not to leave. We know where you live. I don't know, what. And so when I said that it could go either way very quickly.
Yep.
I still think either way very quickly could be hopium. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just speculating either way, and I'm hypothesizing, and we're riffing here. I'm trying to be open to all information. One of the reasons I first reached out to you was I thought you would be the anti-BIP 110 show. I was looking, I'm trying to have this conversation in good faith. I'm trying to be open-minded. I might have strong opinions, but I'm trying to hold them loosely because I think that this really comes down to ideas, what's best, not, there's a lot of question about the size of this movement. It seems very real, authentic, and large to me. Again, it feels like it's already in consensus, but I have been wrong many times in my life about lots of different things. And I could be in an echo chamber, or I could be being narrow-minded. I might have hopium. I don't know. So I'm just trying to figure this out like everyone else, and in some ways, sort of the whole, there's no we in Bitcoin. If you abstain, you're kind of along for the ride.
Yes.
So do you want to act or not act? How do you feel about acting or not acting? And all these things, I really do believe there's a shared reality here, and that reality will somehow be expressed. So I'll leave it to you for any parting words or thoughts or any topics you want to bring up at this point. But I hope we've covered some of the things we set out to.
Well, just on the point of the anti-BIP 110 show, it's funny that I guess
Not that any show was predetermined.
No, but yeah, I didn't realize if maybe you had reached out before I had flipped back or what was it. But I've been in this spot a little bit of pissing off both sides, and because I was in some of the chat groups that where Dathan Ohm was starting to circulate this thing around like-minded people, and well, I wasn't toxic enough for them. I was voicing criticism and concern, and I still have I think it's not technically ideal. I don't think that, and I keep saying it. I don't think that it's technically ideal. I think there are some things that could have been done differently. I don't want to get into that, but like I was vocal about that.
Ideal is also not the world we live in.
Exactly.
That's where, because like, if I didn't like this, I would have to act, I think, in some form to stop it. I've done a lot of soul searching on, not that I don't like it, not that I've had to think about why I would stop it, but I'm like, well, if I come to a decision that I don't like it, and or if someone did something to the rules that I didn't like in the future that I viewed as a minority, and even an intolerant minority, what would we do? What would we, being somehow the decentralized network of different entities, whatever you want to call them, node runners, miners, combination of both, devs, all of it, what would happen? And if an intolerant minority could somehow harm the network and not be stoppable, it's not the network I thought it was.
Well, and you just said a anti-BIP 110 talking point if you didn't couch it in all this other stuff, right? Like, and,
okay.
Well, no. What, like, but I'm saying that I'm making a real point here. Like with
I didn't mean to.
No, the opposition by doing nothing is letting it happen, right? And I'm saying time and again with a sort of pissing off both sides thing here, right? Like I was going to bat for that BIP 110 was reasonable the entire time, and getting into arguments with Adam back, well, plenty of other people, but it was significant to me that Adam started replying to a bunch of my posts and arguing with little old me, you know what I mean? So that was something. But I was adamant about things like that, even though BIP 110 has some trade-offs, that those are reasonable, and that putting in policy limits is completely reasonable. BIP 110 is not censorship at all. It's a policy tightening. It's a rule change, a rule tightening. It's not affecting permissionlessness at all. Anyone can still use the network without asking a third party's permission. It's not affecting permissionlessness at all. If the rules have changed somewhat, actually, this was a thought I had the other day. You do ask permission of the network by submitting a valid transaction. You don't have to ask a specific third-party entity, but you do have to get the permission of the network, first by node runners and second by miners, right? A miner has to agree to mine the transaction you've put in, and the nodes have to validate that block as being valid. So you can think of it either or. You have to convince both, right? So that's who you have to get the permission from. And if the collective network changes the rules, the nodes are enforcing, and that they will allow blocks from miners to include. You still don't have to ask a third party if you to ask permission. You don't have to ask permission from a third party in order to submit a transaction, but you do have to follow the rules in order to get that to be a part of the network chain. And BIP 110 changes nothing of that. So I've been adamant about all of that this entire time, right? So I'm pissing off this side, I'm pissing off that side. I'm not toxic enough for the maxis, the monetary maxis, and I'm somehow this pleb slopper technically illiterate hack. You asked me. I think this is before the intro and everything. What was the motivation of writing this book, Defending Bitcoin? Proof of work. I wanted to show that, like, yeah, here's something that I've taken from my past life and applied it to Bitcoin. Here's something concrete, something that I hope and believe is beneficial. I mean, I really do think that every Bitcoiner would benefit from reading this book. It's why I'm making a ton of the content actually available for free on the accompanying website, defendingbitcoin.com. If you want to support me, buy the book, but I'm making the bulk of the information, if not virtually all of it, for free on the website. And I'm just trying to make a contribution, help Bitcoin be more secure, help Bitcoiners be more secure. But I wanted to show that, like, here's what I think is a novel take, novel idea, and it's my experience, my work. I'm a technical person. I'm not just pulling all of this out of my butt. You know what I mean? And I spent 6 months putting that together from about November to May. I went and focused on that instead of being in the trenches of the fork wars for a while. And coincidentally, when I was done writing a book, I had a little more time to get more active on Twitter, But yeah, the whole thing with that was, I'm not a technically illiterate person, and I'm going to stand up to people who I think are accusing plebs of not understanding Bitcoin just because that they're not devs. I think that's elitist, and it's not going to result in Bitcoin being adopted by the world and getting us out of fiat debt slavery and the money printer. And I think they're just missing the forest for the trees, to use another analogy. So I don't know where to land this particular.
For me,
thread,
it's I still go through. It's like it's binary, and you could be sort of the third rail, but it's sort of like there are people who are doing this. The code's been released; it's going to activate. So more than one or more want it. If you're in the crowd of meh, I strategically think of that as saying I'm okay with it. I might not want it. I might be against it. But if it happened, I'm going to be okay. If I didn't think I was going to be okay and I thought I would be infringed upon to the point where I think it's going to harm me, I would take action. And the only action then would be to go against it. And then I would have to make an argument for why I want something different. And I can't make an argument for why I want the rules not to get stricter. I think the rules constricting or being more conservative just somehow directionally feels right. And arguing for the other direction does not feel right to me in this particular case. But I'm trying to think through if I didn't know what it was. Just someone's doing something, it's going to harm me and something I care about. Take no action or take action. Take no action is sort of kind of going along with it. I do think there's times that you could take no action. If there's a war in my street, a gang fight, and I find out that one gang leader killed another gang leader's wife, I might not take the side that's been harmed. I might not take their side because they're the victim in this latest infraction, because I don't know who they killed right before that. And so I might say, this is not my blood battle. I'm going to not for me, and let them have the natural attrition. And if you could be just stand by, I think that's okay in that. I mean, my father served in the Army. One of the few things, he only asked me not to do two things in life. Don't become a public school teacher like him, and don't go into the Army. Live, and fight for yourself. So yeah, I don't think there's no action. And so we're just in this binary place. And we'll see what happens. I'm not Nostradamus, but we'll see what happens here.
No, we will. And I mean, I think you got it exactly right, though. If you don't take action, if you don't feel, really, I do believe that the potentially fatal mistake of BIP 110 opponents is not taking it seriously enough. And no matter what happens, people supporting 110 have conviction, and we'll see where those convictions lead. I might not follow it all the way to the end. I made another joke that no matter what, all my coins are Luke coins, so I kind of win either way. But really, it's Bitcoin is Bitcoin, and a hard fork away would be a hard fork away, and I have no intention of moving away to a hard fork. But I do hope that Bitcoin continues to be the force that could do all this good that we hope it will do in the world. And I think 110 improves on that goal, and I think rejecting 110 is at worst neutral. At best neutral, and at worst it's harmful for Bitcoin's ultimate goals. So, but hey, we'll see. And I look forward to having another conversation after this is all done, because this has really been a lot of fun. And well, not fun, it's a serious issue, but I've really enjoyed talking.
Me too. We're gonna let people know where to find your work. But my last thought, and I've had a lot of them here, it's kind of like the movie A Few Good Men. I don't know if that movie had a good outcome. I go back on sort of the morality of that movie a lot in terms of the outcome and whether a nation was weakened that day. But one thing I think a lot about is why the two orders that sort of conflict each other. So if this is really bad, then I would think you have to take action. If it's really bad and you're not telling people that it's a nothing burger, that's sort of the two orders. And they sort of conflict. So
there you go.
Where can people get Defending Bitcoin? I know they can get it on Amazon. Do you guys sell it? And where can people find you and the rest of your work?
Yeah, thanks. Well, so Defending Bitcoin, defendingbitcoin.com. That's the place to go. And I'll be expanding the website, adding a lot more features. Right now, there's a threat model worksheet that you can work through to see how this stuff in the book might apply to you. The spoiler is that most of it does when we're talking about network level, but people have different situations and all this, and it makes it concrete. But I plan on expanding it with quite a bit more stuff. We also have the Bitcoin Infinity Store, bitcoininfinitystore.com. I have not gotten Defending Bitcoin up there yet, but we're shipping a update to that website with not only my book, but Max Hillebrand's Praxeology of Privacy, which I absolutely encourage you to give that a read and talk to, you personally said to talk to Max about, because it's a fantastic book. My privacy chapter is basically a distillation of his fantastic book. A few more things coming. Leonie Appelberg's Abundance Through Scarcity is coming, and we've also got the big print Larry Lepard and all of Knut Svanholm's books there available for SATs. So I've been a little slow getting my own book up and available there, but life has thrown some curveballs at me, so I've been a little slow. For me personally, I'm at Luke DeWolf on X. You can find me anywhere else. I have a pretty distinctive name. I'm the only one I'm aware of. Just don't confuse me for Luke Dashjr, I guess. But yeah, I'm just out here being me. I wear a lot of hats. You can find my conference organization work at btchel.com. I'm one of the organizers of the BTC Hell conference in Helsinki, Finland, and that's one of the things I'm most proud about in the space, is helping to grow adoption in my local area. So I'm not just here fighting in the trenches of the spam wars. I really do believe in the power of Bitcoin, and I want to grow adoption and bring people into the fold, and I want to believe in Bitcoin and believe in what that's trying to do here. So yeah, I wear a lot of hats. You can find me a lot of places. But
sounds awesome. Thank you so much. This has been so dope.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, that's a wrap on the latest episode of the Bitcoin Matrix. If this one added value, share it with one person who needs to hear it. That's how the Bitcoin Matrix grows. None of this happens without our sponsors, Stampseed, Firefish, and Club Orange, companies I personally use and genuinely believe in. Follow me on X at @Youngelman and the show at _Bitcoin Matrix. We're in the conversation every single day. Stay humble Keep stacking. Spend your time well. It's the one thing you can't get back. And keep your head on a swivel out there. This is said. Now escape the matrix.